The hospital corridor was cold and silent, except for the sound of hurried footsteps and the distant beeping of machines monitoring lives hanging by a thread. Lucas, sitting on the edge of a plastic chair, gripped his phone tightly, but not to check messages. He stared at the black screen as if he could single-handedly absorb all the pain of the people around him. The muffled sobs of the woman at the reception seemed to blend with the tightness in his chest. The little boy trembling in his father's arms carried a weight Lucas felt as his own, even though they were complete strangers. Every sob, every expression of despair seemed to find a place within him, as if there were infinite room to carry sorrows that weren't his. Deep down, Lucas didn't know whether this ability was a gift or a curse. Like someone diving into icy waters to save another, even without knowing how to swim, he sank into collective suffering without measuring the consequences. His body reacted tense muscles, shallow breaths, a nausea that did not come from himself, but from the weight of everyone else. And just like Lucas, there are creatures in the animal world that don't just live their own battles, but carry the marks and tensions of the entire group. The elephant seal, for example, does not only face its predators and storms. It bears on its body and in its instincts the scars of disputes and threats that have shaped its whole colony. It is not merely an individual, it is the guardian, the living shield, the weight of all upon itself. But how far can bearing the pain of others be an act of love? And when does it become a silent sentence against oneself? The sun had been up for hours, yet Clara was still sitting on the same wooden bench in the town square. The thick coat didn't shield her from the biting cold, but she seemed oblivious to the temperature. Her attention was fixed on a woman at the far end of the square, arguing on the phone with a trembling voice. Clara didn't know who that woman was, nor the reason for her tears. But every word, cut short by sobs, seemed to pierce the air and strike her own chest. It was always like this. Whenever she crossed paths with someone carrying pain, it was as if her body became a vessel ready to absorb it. On the bus, sitting next to a man with a vacant stare, she felt a lump in her throat. At the market, seeing a child crying over a toy they wouldn't get, she felt the weight of that frustration in her own muscles. There were days she came home exhausted, as if she had run miles. Yet the effort was invisible, an internal race, carrying the emotional burdens of strangers. That morning, Clara realized she was holding back tears. Not for what had happened to her, but for what was happening to everyone around her. The nervous laughter of a couple trying to mask an argument, the empty stare of an elderly man, the restless anxiety of a teenager fidgeting endlessly with his phone. It was as if she were connected to everyone by invisible strings, and each tug on those strings pulled more weight into her. In the natural world, there is a creature that lives something similar, not in the human sense of empathy, but through an instinct to bear the battles of an entire group. The male elephant seal, upon claiming a stretch of beach for his colony, also takes on the responsibility of defending it. He faces rival males, fights until he bleeds, endures deep wounds to keep safe the dozens of females and pups who depend on his territory. The weight is not only in his body, but in what it means to fail. If he loses, the entire group loses. Like Clara, the elephant seal does not live solely for himself. Each scar on his back is a living memory of a moment when collective safety rested on his shoulders. For him, it is a survival instinct of the species. For her, it is an emotional instinct that asks for no permission. It simply happens. Neuroscience suggests that people like Clara have heightened activity in brain regions linked to empathy, particularly the medial prefrontal cortex, and the anterior insula, responsible for processing emotions and internally simulating another's experience. It is as if the brain cannot distinguish where the self ends and the other begins. This same kind of merging, on a different scale, exists in the animal kingdom, where collective survival often depends on an individual taking on risks and pains that are not exclusively their own. But unlike the elephant seal, who alternates periods of fighting with long dives into the ocean to recover, Clara had no natural refuge. She carried the weight continuously, accumulating stories she hadn't lived, pains she hadn't asked for, and responsibilities no one had formally given her, yet she took them upon herself. That morning, as the woman in the square hung up the phone and wiped her face, Clara felt the urge to approach. Maybe to offer a glass of water, maybe just to be present, but she stopped. The cold air filled her lungs, and she wondered whether she was helping or only sinking deeper into the emotional sea she had built. On the horizon, the elephant seal faces another male threatening his territory. He doesn't think about whether he wants to fight. He simply fights because the group needs him. Clara, however, still had a choice. The question was, did she know how to use it? The late afternoon wind blew hard, scattering dry leaves along the narrow street as Clara walked back home. The day had been long, not because of commitments, but because of the invisible weight she carried. At work, she had felt the silent despair of a colleague trying to hide her dark circles behind makeup. At the bakery, she noticed the anxiety of a man waiting for change, his hand trembling slightly. It was as if every encounter left an echo inside her, and those echoes never completely faded. As she walked, she remembered a meeting that morning. A client had received bad news over the phone, and, although she had no connection to what happened, she spent the rest of the day with a knot in her stomach, as if it were her own loss. She wondered how other people could simply move on without absorbing everything. Thousands of miles away, on a fog-covered, isolated beach, a male elephant seal lay motionless on the damp sand. His half-closed eyes seemed at rest, but every muscle was ready. Around him, dozens of females rested with newborn pups. He could sense in the air the presence of other males young and hungry for territory circling at a distance. The sound of a deep roar echoed in the wind. It was the beginning of another battle. Like Clara, he could not simply ignore it. The territory was more than physical space. It was shelter, safety, and guaranteed food for the colony. A failure on his part would mean vulnerability for everyone. The weight of this responsibility wasn't a conscious thought. It was instinct, shaped by generations of struggle for survival. The comparison was clear. While Clara absorbed pains and anxieties that did not belong to her, the elephant seal absorbed risks and confrontations to protect the group. Both lived connected to others in a way that didn't allow them to switch off. Research in evolutionary psychology shows that deep empathy may have adaptive roots. In small, primitive human groups, feeling another's suffering intensely could mean acting to save lives, strengthening bonds, and ensuring collective survival. But in modern environments, this limitless sensitivity can turn into chronic emotional overload, something the body interprets as a constant threat. Clara knew the weight was growing. Her shoulders ached, her breathing was shallow, and at night, when she lay down, it wasn't silence that welcomed her, but a chorus of other people's worries mixing with her own. On the beach, the roar came again closer. The elephant seal raised his head, feeling the vibration in his chest. He moved forward slowly, his massive body leaving grooves in the sand. The opponent emerged through the fog, larger than expected, but hesitant. In her own world, Clara also felt something approaching, not physically, but internally, a limit she had never recognized before. As the male advanced toward the inevitable fight, Clara stopped in the middle of the sidewalk, realizing that if she didn't do something, she would be dragged into a conflict invisible to the eyes, but consuming her from within. Instinct told her to keep absorbing, but something new emerged: doubt. The elephant seal knew he couldn't retreat without losing everything. But Clara? Where did duty end, and where did self-destruction begin? Night fell early, dyeing the city a dark blue almost like liquid. Clara was at home, trying to find refuge in the silence. The yellowish light from the lamp barely lit the room, and the steam from her tea rose slowly, as if wanting to protect her from the weight she carried. but the peace lasted little. From the apartment next door, voices began to grow louder, penetrating the thin walls. They were not just words. It was anger, frustration, and a despair that seeped into her like smoke through cracks. Each sound seemed louder, closer. Clara's heart quickened, as if she herself were trapped in that argument. She stood up and began pacing the room, trembling hands, feeling on her skin a heat that wasn't hers. Her breathing became rapid and shallow, and a knot formed in her stomach. She thought about calling someone, but she knew that, for most people, feeling too much wasn't something that required help. It was just weakness or exaggeration. Meanwhile, on the fog-covered beach, the elephant seal and his opponent faced each other. The air smelled of salt and dried blood from old battles. The deep sound of their roars made the sand vibrate. Each step toward the other was a promise of pain. But he could not back down. Behind him, the females and pups formed a semicircle of attentive eyes, dependent on his strength. One false move and the whole territory could be lost. Clara's tension mirrored his. The elephant seal felt the physical weight of his body ready for impact. Clara felt the invisible weight of emotions accumulating until her body believed it was in real danger. The human brain, after all, does not fully distinguish physical threat from intense emotional threat. In both cases, the nervous system sounds alarms, flooding the body with adrenaline and cortisol. The neighbor slammed a door forcefully. Clara took a step toward the hallway, as if she needed to intervene, prevent something worse from happening. She wasn't sure what she would do, but the feeling that she had to act was overwhelming. On the beach, the first clash occurred. Two colossal bodies collided with a dull thud, scattering sand and foam. The elephant seal felt the pressure on his bones and the pain tearing his skin, but stood firm, using every muscle to push the intruder away. He knew that pain was part of the guardian's role. There was no choice. Clara knocked on a neighbor's door. The voices stopped for a moment, and the silence that followed felt even heavier. Her hand was sweaty, her heart pounding like a drum against her chest. She didn't know if she was helping or just throwing herself into someone else's fire. The elephant seal, bleeding and exhausted, managed to make his opponent retreat a few meters. It wasn't a victory yet, but it was a chance. Clara, standing before that closed door, felt something similar. A small advance, but no guarantee of peace. Both were breathing heavily. Both were in the middle of battle, one in the physical field, the other in the emotional. And for both, the question remained: how long can one fight other people's wars without losing one's own strength? The early morning arrived carrying a strange silence, as if the city was holding its breath. Clara lay awake, but she wasn't sleeping. What had happened in the neighboring apartment kept pulsing in her mind. She didn't know if she had helped or just interfered, but she felt drained, as if she had crossed an invisible battlefield. Every muscle in her body ached, not from physical exertion, but from accumulated tension. She got up to drink some water. Looking out the window, she saw the streetlights reflecting in the puddle left by the fine rain that had fallen hours before. That liquid reflection reminded her of something distant, like the mirror of the sea she had never seen up close. Perhaps that was why, in her tired mind, the image blurred with that of the elephant seal on the foggy beach. At that moment, he was at the height of the fight. The younger opponent attacked fiercely, trying to knock him down. The sand stuck to open wounds, and the sea salt burned like blades. The old male already felt the weight of years. Every charge was a toll on his body. Every roar a reminder that this battle wasn't only his, but for all who depended on the territory. Clara, like him, realized that standing firm came at a high cost. By carrying the pain of others, she was spending reserves she might need for herself. Psychologists call this compassion fatigue, an emotional exhaustion that affects people who are constantly exposed to others' suffering. Neuroscience explains that in this state, the brain starts reacting as if danger is constant, keeping the body on alert and preventing recovery. The elephant seal felt his muscles burning, but could not show weakness. He knew the opponent was waiting for a moment of hesitation to strike with full force. Clara also knew that the world around her would not lessen the burden she carried just because she was tired. Still, there was something different about this early morning, an unsettling sense that maybe the limit was near. The male seal stepped back, not by choice, but because his hind leg faltered for a second. That was enough for the opponent to advance violently, pushing him almost to the line where the wave's foam wetted the sand. The cold water hit his hot body, causing a shock that awakened him to the imminent risk. If he retreated any further, he would lose his position and with it, the territory. Leaning against the window, Clara felt something similar. Part of her wanted to turn off the phone, close the curtains, and shield herself from the world. But another part, stronger and more rooted, told her she couldn't step away, because there were people who needed someone to feel what they couldn't express. On the horizon of the beach, the elephant seal gathered strength for another advance. On Clara's inner horizon, a thought echoed. What if, to protect others, I first need to protect myself? For both, the fight still had no winner. But the early morning was already making clear that every blow, physical or emotional, came at a price. And that price was accumulating. Dawn brought a pale, almost gray light that slipped through the crack in the curtain. Clara sat on the living room floor, still dressed in the clothes from the previous day. She didn't remember having slept. Her body felt like stone-heavy and motionless, but her mind was restless, spinning around every fragment of pain she had absorbed in recent days. Her phone vibrated. It was a message from a coworker. "Do you have a minute to talk?" Clara closed her eyes and sighed. She knew that behind that request was something deeper, perhaps a venting, perhaps another story to carry. She wanted to reply, but realized that even the act of typing seemed to require a strength she no longer had. On the other side of the world, the elephant seal was at his limit. The opponent had pushed him almost to the edge of the tide, where the cold water lapped at his hind flippers. Each breath was accompanied by a hoarse sound, and his body trembled slightly not from fear, but exhaustion. The females watched silently, as if understanding that the fate of the group was being decided at that moment. Clara stood up with effort and went to the bathroom. She looked at herself in the mirror and barely recognized herself. There were shadows under her eyes, and her skin seemed paler. It felt as if a part of her had been drained. Studies show that extreme empathy activates the same neural circuit responsible for physical pain, meaning the body doesn't distinguish between suffering for oneself or for another. Clara lived this physically and was beginning to realize that the accumulated weight was undermining her own ability to exist healthily. The elephant seal, even on the verge of exhaustion, did something born from the depths of instinct. He lowered his head, charged with all the remaining strength, and struck the opponent on the flank. The impact was brutal, raising sand and salt. The other male, surprised, retreated a few meters, giving him a few precious seconds to breathe. Clara, in turn, picked up her phone again, but this time wrote something she had never dared to say. "I want to listen to you, but today I can't. I need to take care of myself." When she sent the message, she felt a mix of guilt and relief, as if she had taken a dangerous but necessary step. On the beach, the opponent hesitated. Maybe he sensed the old male still had energy to resist. Maybe he calculated that a victory would cost too much. Slowly, he withdrew into the fog, disappearing from sight. The elephant seal did not celebrate. He just turned and returned to the center of the territory, each step marked by weight and pain. Clara didn't smile either, but for the first time in a long while, she took a deep breath and felt that the air was hers alone. There was still much to face, but understanding that she couldn't carry everything was a start. And both she and the elephant seal knew, protecting others is only possible when you still have the strength to stand. The day moved slowly, with the sun filtering through high, translucent clouds. Clara walked through the same square where she had so often lost herself in others' pain. The sounds around her, footsteps, conversations, laughter, cries, still reached her, but something was different. It wasn't indifference, but a healthy distance. It was like watching the sea, acknowledging the power of the waves without needing to dive into each one. On the bench where she used to sit, she took a deep breath. She realized she still felt, still connected, but now there was an inner space that was hers alone, a refuge that didn't let emotional currents drag her so deep. She understood that to be truly present in someone's life, she didn't need to carry the whole weight. It was enough to be available when she had the strength to support. On a distant beach, the elephant seal rested on the sand, his body marked by fresh scars. The sea slowly lapped at the edge of the territory he had defended at such a cost. Around him, the females and pups remained calm, unaware of the battle that had taken place to keep that piece of safety. He closed his eyes, not out of weakness, but to recover. He knew other fights would come, but now, for a few hours, he could simply exist. Neuroscience calls this emotional regulation, the ability to recognize the intensity of what one feels and create a space for recovery before the wear becomes irreversible. Animals like the elephant seal have this written in their instinct: fight when necessary and rest when the fight is over. For humans like Clara, this pause must be learned, one against guilt and the belief that always being available is synonymous with love. As the waves receded and advanced, both Clara and the elephant seal understood, each in their own way. That strength is not resisting all the time. It is knowing when to stop so as not to lose oneself. In the end, perhaps empathy isn't carrying another's pain on your shoulders until your own body bends. Perhaps it's simply walking alongside, ready to help, but with your feet firmly on your own ground. Because only then can one sustain, for longer, the beauty and the weight of feeling. And the question that remains is, how many battles have we fought that weren't ours? And how many times have we mistaken that for love?